Hi, I'm Tony Williams, and this is Brooklyn Savvy. Hi, this is Tony Williams, and welcome to Brooklyn Savvy. We're going to be talking about all of this change that we're seeing in Brooklyn. You know, we see all of these high rises coming up. We've got all of these hotels, but how is that really changing the neighborhoods in Brooklyn? And we're going to do that. We're going to ask that question of Gretchen Manival of Think Brooklyn. But before we get started, let me introduce our Savvy panel: Daniela Romano, Jennifer Jones-Austin, and Ellen Salpeter. So talk to us, Gretchen, about these Brooklyn neighborhood reports, because we see all of this prosperity in Brooklyn.
Right.
And it looks like a lot of wealthy people are coming in and some of these demographics are shifting. But how is that really trickling down into some of the neighborhoods?
So it's a very important question to consider, right? Because we know that people live, work, go to school. Life happens at the neighborhood level here in Brooklyn and in New York City. So when we don't have information at the neighborhood level, at that level of granularity, then we might miss some of the need, especially that's being eclipsed when we have all of this gentrification coming in, right? So, and why do we need this information? Because we need to make decisions about resource allocation, about how to tailor our programming and services, how to advocate for influential public policy that's going to really have a positive impact on
How many
neighborhoods.
neighborhoods are there in Brooklyn?
That's a very good question. We have about 70 or so that we include in our Brooklyn neighborhood reports.
You said
70.
That's what I thought. Okay.
Right, around 70. But different folks have different interpretations. Some feel that there are upwards of 90, 95, 97 neighborhoods in Brooklyn. The way that the data comes specifically, about half of the data in our report from the census, about the other half are from a dozen or so other sources. Those data come by community district. And so when we're calling them the Brooklyn neighborhood reports, we're really talking about community districts, of which there are 18 in Brooklyn. But oftentimes with our clients, our community-based organizations in particular, they're looking at a level that's even a subset of a community district.
So within a district, there might be 5 neighborhoods.
There might be 5 neighborhoods.
Like in New York City on the whole, there are like, what, 59, I think?
There are 59 community districts, that's right. But some would say upwards of 280 or so neighborhoods.
So you would take like a community such as the Bedford-Stuyvesant community, and then you would drill down to neighborhoods within that community.
That's right. And we do that all the time for our clients. They might want to look at what their particular catchment area is, or they might want to use a saturation model. So they could say, okay, what impact are we having on just these 5 or 6 census tracts? So we'll mine the data, we'll analyze them, and we'll aggregate up into a customized zone for them. And we sometimes call them zones of highest need. And then we'll compare that customized zone to the community district data, the All Brooklyn data, New York City, all the way up to national. And one can imagine how compelling it is when we look at indicators such as poverty, unemployment, et cetera, at that.
But what I find most startling is we have a median income of about 44,000. You know, that's very,
For a family of 4.
Yes, that's very, very low. Yet we look at all this, you know, what's shifting in the borough in terms of who's moving in and how much housing costs are and that kind of thing. It seems like there's a lot do you think
that's true? I mean, I know you're comparing, this is Brooklyn data, but I think that's true in New York City in general.
Well,
I mean,
absolutely.
you know, there's so much, I mean, when 1 in 5 Brooklynites lives in poverty, that's a staggering number when 20% of your population.
And when we look at, for example, neighborhoods such as Park Slope and Carroll Gardens, look at median income, which is around 90,000, and then look at some of the neighborhoods that have the lowest median income, like Brownsville, East New York, and that's at about 30,000. We can see how those disparities emerge. Now, if we drill down at a more granular level and looked at just several census tracts, the highest need census tracts, the disparities would get even greater. And
that talks about allocation of resources as well. You know, and when you look at communities like Brownsville and you look at their nonprofit infrastructure, it's really not there. So how do we work with, meaning your work you basically get this data, and then you help nonprofits also use this in their funding packages.
We do. All the time we're asked for discrete questions that their funders require them to report on. So they could either maybe have to look at particular trends, specific indicators over time. They also might want to, as a part of their requirements for funding, they're tailoring programming and services. So they might want to directly ask their constituents, what do you need? And so then we'll do primary data collection through surveying. We've administered with our community partners over 5,000 surveys over the last few
Let's
years.
talk a little bit more about your data. So is your data primarily survey-based? Do you work with the city's planning department to gather data? Do you work with city agencies? Or is it pretty much information gathering that you do independent of some of these more established institutions?
So we do both. We work with about 70 or 80 data sets, data sources, depending upon how they're defined. So a good number of the data are from the census, and we call those our low-hanging fruit, right? Those are pretty obvious and clear. We do some what I call data expediting. So the data that are supposed to be publicly available, but you might have to submit a FOIA or a FOIL request to get on behalf of our clients. We'll do that. And then some of the data just aren't there. They aren't available.
So then you do primary
and then we do the primary research to mine those data. And what's interesting too is oftentimes we'll do surveying and we'll ask the same types of questions that are available publicly, and then we'll see how the answers differ.
That's interesting.
And
but your
explore
samples are
why.
large enough to make them statistically relevant.
Well, we don't do random sampling with our surveys. We do more of a social network. So who are the clients, who are potential clients, what are their networks, and then we call those together. So, and we make sure, I was speaking with a client today and saying that we want to make sure that we're not paralyzed by methodology sometimes.
Absolutely,
right? So we can move forward as long as we're very clear and transparent about the assumptions that are made and the methods that we use, because at the end of the day, it's just important that we hear from the people who we're trying to serve.
Let me ask you, so how long have you been doing this?
About 7 years.
And if you had to pull out one data point, one particular indicator, where you've seen a dramatic change, dramatic shift, what would that be?
Oh, that's a really good question. I think I can speak more to the disparity. And when we're looking at issues such as, let's talk about poverty for a moment. So 1/5 to 1/4 of Brooklynites living in poverty. Children, 1/3 of Brooklynites live in poverty. When we look at that from the perspective of, again, the disparities of neighborhoods and which neighborhoods poverty has actually decreased overall.
That's a
so
good
that's
thing.
a good
But
thing.
we know why.
But we know why. And when we look at neighborhoods such as Bed-Stuy, where 50% of children live in poverty. Sunset Park, Crown Heights, Flatbush, around 35% or so children live in poverty. So those neighborhoods, the trend is not necessarily a good one. And so we all conventionally, wisdom tells us that we know where some of these hot spots are. But what I like to do too is take a step back and we look at the percentages, but let's look at the hard numbers. So 1/5 of Brooklynites living in poverty is nearly 600,000 people.
Right.
1/3 of Brooklyn's children living in poverty is nearly 200,000 children. So that's larger than most cities in the United States, right? And so if we just look at the percentages and the facts and figures, I think we lose sight of the faces of what those data to humanize it. And so a big piece of what we do is it's important to make data-driven decisions, but it's also really important to look at policy and funding, allocation and budgeting and program services from the experiential lens.
Right, so you inform that through the data, or do you do more than that? Do you do any kind of advocacy work?
We don't do advocacy work, but our approach is both quantitative and qualitative. So we do interviewing, focus groups, town hall meetings, visioning sessions.
We're making sure that the constituents have a voice.
That they have a voice, right? And they might find that the data resonate with them, and yes, this is what we're seeing on the ground, or no, it might be completely different than what
Daniela, you had a point.
Well, I'm getting that most of your clients are not-for-profits or service organizations, community-based organizations. I guess it's a two-part question. First is how do they find you? And the second is, are private enterprises also reaching out to you for that reason?
As you were talking,
Yeah,
I was thinking, so on the whole changing Brooklyn gentrification thing, are real estate companies using you to spin the data?
I would love to hear that.
To get to show that you know,
Right.
as they're pitching a certain cohort, that here's the data you want to see.
Right.
Yeah.
We all know that to a certain extent we have to be careful because one could make data say what one wants data to
Exactly.
say.
And you
So,
want to do it with integrity.
Right. So that's why we're always very clear with our methodology, and we are nonpartisan. We are not an advocacy group, but anyone can use our data and avail themselves of our services who wants to. I was recently searching for something, and I came across a blog that had listed me and quoted some of the data as a reason for a business to locate in a particular neighborhood. But it was a spin that I was a little bit uncomfortable with from a socioeconomic justice lens through which I approach our work and our mission-based. But at the end of the day, again, it's out there for public consumption, and we have worked with clients before who are businesses, and to the extent that they're it's a part of economic development. It's a so that I'm very comfortable with.
Well, we've been joined by Devorah Halberstam. Thank you so much, Devorah, for joining us. And Daniela, you had a question.
Thanks, Tony. So your clients are typically like not-for-profits and service organizations, not usually organizations with a lot of resources. How do they find you?
So we are about to launch our new website. We'll have a very deep web presence shortly in the next few weeks or so. We also have a Brooklyn organization directory that has over 1,000 nonprofits in Brooklyn, and we use that as our network. So we reach out through that, and as we launch our website, we'll be re-engaging with that group of nonprofits.
When you launch your new website, I don't know how your social media presence is, and you and I have known each other a long time, but I was thinking, like, when you unpick a great piece of data, do you tweet it? Like, is that...
That would be a good idea.
Like, just a little nugget, like, whoa, just learned that, like, only 2% of Brooklynites speak Urdu or whatever. I don't know. I don't know how to make it sexier than that, but it seems to me like it's ripe for social media.
I love that idea. I have to have the stamina to tweet
Oh,
as often as
Well, how about
Or Snapchat or Instagram or pick some platform.
No, but I love that because all of the time, it's such a pleasure in our line of work that we are learning constantly too, right? And depending upon the particular need or question of our clients, we get to explore so many different issues and at the neighborhood level or more globally, and having those aha moments are actually quite frequent, and I love the idea of sharing that.
And let's talk about, give us a profile of Brooklyn right now, where the immigrants are, because again, I think almost 40% of the people that live in Brooklyn are immigrants, so to speak.
That's right.
Okay.
That's right. About 40% are foreign born. An interesting fact, a tweetable fact, is that about 45% of those are not U.S. citizens. So they could be
45% of the 40%.
The 40%, right? And so those tidbits, like parsing that out more, is
You find that out through green card? How do you find that out?
those data about foreign-born census data.
Oh, okay.
Are they all living here, or are they second homeowners, or is it like real estate interests?
So I don't know that question.
Okay, that's all right.
But I can tell you places of birth. So about 50% of Brooklynites were actually born in New York State. And then that is followed by China. I've got to look at my notes here. China, then Jamaica, then Haiti, Dominican Republic, and Puerto Rico.
So Caribbean, that's not surprising.
So that's
right. But what about the Chinese, the Chinese community? I was here, I thought that was one that was rapidly growing. And Brooklyn as Orthodox Jewish community was rapidly growing.
The Chinese growth in Brooklyn?
In particular, we looked at neighborhoods, Community District 10, which is like Bay Ridge, Denker Heights specifically. Over a 10-year period or so, starting in about 2000, there was around an 80% increase in the Chinese population in just that
But I mean,
community
you know,
district.
scope matters or scale matters, because you could have
Right.
2 and then you have 3.5 and you got an 80% increase.
Right.
I mean, like,
So it's about 6,000. So in that particular community district,
Right.
it jumped from about 6,000. I think it was 6,000 to 9,000 to 17,000.
That's a lot.
So nearly doubled.
Right, right.
That's that percentage. When we look at the breakdown of race, race/ethnicity, we are about a third white, a third African American, about 1/5 Hispanic, and then about 10% Asian. Ethnicity is interesting when you take a look at it. We have over 180 ethnicities here in Brooklyn.
You know what? And I've always found that really baffling. Like there are 180 ethnicities on the planet.
right. And are those self-defined?
Yes.
Right.
All of the census data
So
are
if I said
self-
I'm purple, that's my ethnicity, then
Yes.
181.
Right, that's true. Well, when you look at the pie chart of ethnicities, about 60% is other, right? And then
What is that?
then that's
What's
followed by
other?
and that's all of those in addition to then followed by African American, Chinese, and then religious responses, which is presumed to be the Hasidic community, the Jewish community in particular, in this neighborhood of Central Brooklyn, Crown Heights, South Crown Heights. And the way that's looked at, and those presumptions are made by looking at languages spoken, overlaid with some other indicators.
But what's interesting is even though we have this diversity, I don't find it as blended. You know, people still live in ethnic enclaves, you know.
Yeah,
It's not, you know, so if someone moving to Brooklyn, you know, they're going to have a diverse experience because they're going to see these people from all over.
I don't
but-
think so anymore.
Oh, I think we definitely
think
have
it's
ethnic
changing.
enclaves.
I think it's really changing
So
now.
what's changing?
I
When you
think-
go to Sunset Park, there's a huge Chinese community. That's
That,
kind of the
well,
ethnic
I can
enclaves.
only speak for Crown
Right,
Heights.
right.
I really can't speak for other
Well, I'm
communities.
talking
not
about
just-
in general, but
So,
go ahead.
but specifically in Crown Heights, I find
Hipsterville.
exactly.
Yeah.
It's so mixed.
But
I
that's-
don't know who is part of what community. To me,
Right.
we're all part of just
But
one
if
big
you go to
community.
Canarsie,
Yeah.
you'll
Yeah,
see
yeah,
a lot
yeah.
of people from Caribbean descent now living in Canarsie.
Right.
If you
That's
go to
true.
parts of Sunset,
Right.
so we are
that's
we are
normal.
moving. Oh,
But
this
that's
is normal.
normal
Oh,
to do
this
that.
is normal. I'm not even
Right,
putting a
right,
value
right,
on it in
right,
that
right.
sense.
Right.
But I'm just, you know, now with hipsters coming in,
Right.
we are starting to see something that you might see in California, where people
Right.
kind of live more closely together.
You know what I love though, when I look at the data that you shared, I love the idea that Brooklyn, the one thing that hasn't changed is it's always been about churn and immigration.
Yeah.
And so you said we have 40% immigrants. Well, probably 100 years ago there was 40% immigrants. They were just from different places.
Right.
And I think that's kind of fabulous,
It-
looking
yeah,
at with the
yeah.
long view
Yeah.
of like how, you know, a neighborhood that was once Hasidic is now Asian, or vice versa, or a neighborhood that was Nordic is now Mexican.
It makes for
You know.
a very healthy metropolis, right? When you look at cities across the country and across the globe that have stagnated, you'll find that there isn't that dynamic churning of folks coming in, folks leaving. So that in some
But
way
you-
makes it much more vibrant.
But you know what? There's something about the way people are culturally attracted to each other, meaning the way families, whether it's the Caribbeans that move into Canarsie, like you said, or the Hasidic Jews moving among themselves, there's something to be said for that. I find the hipsters that move in are not attached to anybody. They're like
They're from the
almost
Midwest,
like-
interestingly enough.
Yeah, but I find them like they're not.
Portland.
I don't feel like they're grounded as much.
Well, they're not.
It goes
They
by
don't.
rent.
Yeah.
It's almost they haven't exactly. They're either too young
But
or they're just.
interestingly,
they're-
though, Devor, if you
What?
look at Williamsburg, okay, not Hasidic Williamsburg, not
Right,
Fat
that-
Williamsburg,
right.
and not Hispanic Williamsburg. You look at the north
The new
side.
Williamsburg.
The now it's old.
It's not
Williamsburg,
old
20
already.
years ago,
Right.
hipsters came there, artists
Right.
came there because they
Right.
needed the rents, the affordable space.
So is the rent.
And now there is firmly a community
Yes.
of that. They now have kids,
Yes.
and they're starting schools, and they have
agree.
set down
I
roots
agree.
in that
Right.
community. They haven't left it. The people that are still artists have moved
Right.
east
Right.
because they can't afford the condos that are now up there. But it's interesting.
Well, there's a spirit of community in Brooklyn, I think in particular, have lived in lots of different cities, and I find the spirit of community and this entrepreneurial spirit and this stick-to-itness, and then also
the Brooklyn grit,
the DIY,
the whole grit thing.
Yeah,
Right.
and even though there are clusters and enclaves, I think there are wonderful benefits to that, and then there are also these kind of pathways of fluidity that people have in common spaces and spaces, right? Where you're riding the subway. I see it kind of as veins, right? Like we're on the subway, we're on the street together, we're working together. I think it's wonderful to be placed in a space where you're confronted with someone who has a different life experience.
But it's interesting how people handle that, though. I mean, I'll talk about going down Franklin,
Yeah.
And there's a bit of, wow, this community has changed. It's not ours, whoever that old community was anymore.
Right.
And then there's the tension around, oh, it now belongs to someone else when
How can we coexist?
yes,
Right.
exactly.
Right.
Well,
exactly.
I was thinking the same thing, but I was also thinking because of my work in Brooklyn, like yours, I've been to a lot, and we've all been to, certainly yours, we've all been to parts of the borough where if someone says, oh, you live in Brooklyn, that's so great, I love Brooklyn, they have never been to. There is no conception. When, they're thinking, if you say Coney or you say another part of Brooklyn, they're thinking of the one restaurant that Time Out wrote up, or the New York Times focused on a cultural trend, but they haven't.
They're not going past Grand Army Plaza, really.
Like, for Brownstone Brooklyn, for sure.
Right.
And people are really proud. Like, I'm from Brooklyn. They're from Brooklyn, the brand.
Right.
The artisanal, locavore kind of brand that's been so widely promoted, and the do-it-yourself and the creatives, context. But they're not thinking. You said Brownsville, East New York. I mean, other neighborhoods like who's been to Manhattan Beach, and things like that. Where
Not me.
Well, they literally weren't, those neighborhoods literally weren't on the map, right? When I first moved here 13 years ago and did affordable housing development, and I was working in neighborhoods that are now really, really gentrified, they were starting to become then, and we would look at maps of Brooklyn, and you would look at Community District 6, Park Slope was as kind of south as it got, and then you were lucky if you got a little bit of Prospect Heights, and then it was Brooklyn Heights on the map. Right, so that has changed, and part of what is, of course, important about that is it honors people who have lived here for decades, and then taking it a step further, we want to just see beyond a map, and we also want to know about them and what their needs are, what the assets are of these communities, but also what the needs are. But if you're not even seeing visually that neighborhoods exist.
And need is very important because, we've got this Barclays Center and there's that big project at BAM. And everywhere you look, there's all this growth. But then we've got a huge number of disconnected youth in Bed-Stuy.
So in light of the gentrification, we see some indicators that are sometimes curious. And we wonder, is this representative of folks who are new and coming in, or is this just a discrepancy from the populations who have already been here? One example is college readiness. We see that only 20% of youth in Brooklyn are deemed college ready, yet 30% of people 25 years and older have bachelor's degrees or higher.
But
Did they
grow up in Brooklyn?
Well, that's the question, right? And so that's what we have to be very careful about when we look at these data, is to kind of parse out and do segmentation analyses around who's responding and what is this about, so that we aren't misled when we're making decisions.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Gretchen. And your organization, Think Brooklyn, is making an incredible impact. Just keep doing the hard work. It's so important. And that is all the time we have for this episode of Brooklyn Savvy. Brooklyn Savvy is a show of women talking about issues that are important to women. These women come from all walks of life, and we span ethnicities, races, and religions, but we share commonalities. We're smart, driven, and involved in community. Brooklyn Savvy is not a place, but a state of mind, a way of managing in a complex, competitive, and challenging urban environment.
fell in love with this person. I had a baby with him. There was something good about him that I saw. You know, how did that all disappear?
He beat me up and, you know, dragged me along the floor. And I thought to myself, you know, if he can do this to a pregnant woman, I don't know what this man is capable of.
Once I moved in with my partner, we decided that I was gonna quit my job. And after that happened, it was like my life just changed. And I was dependent on someone, and I was constantly being told that I was dependent on someone. And to the point where I didn't even have keys to my apartment. My mom was physically abusive as well as verbally abusive. So meeting a partner who was similar, even though I knew that that's wrong, but it felt very comfortable, like it's normal. I lost everything. I was just a body walking.
I was dying, and part of me was like, my children deserve a mother who's happy. My children deserve a mother.
He could have killed my child, and I was not there. I said, that's it. This is it. I have to go.
It was like treading water with my son in one arm, my daughter in the other. I see land somewhere over there, and I'm trying to get to land, and here's their father over there swimming with the sharks. And I'm like, well, I can't help him and us. We can't do all this.
There is a whole poor woman out there who are going through the slavery, the abuse. I didn't have clothes, food. I was like empty-handed. I didn't have anything, but I'm going to college this year, which is the greatest thing. I want to work for United Nations and the human rights. I'm not gonna stop until I see everybody out of slavery. I'm not gonna stop, I will fight. I'll stand here to be their voice.
So we can all empower each other and become better citizens. And if I'm able to do well because of Sanctuary Support, I will be able to support somebody else because of that.